The second largest country in the world, Canada, never used to have the reputation of being a warmongering pro-Zionist neocon state. But under Stephen Harper, it's become that. And we spoke to Alberta-based journalist Joshua Blakeney about what has gone so wrong. Welcome, Joshua Blakeney. You've just flown in from Canada, all the way for Double Standards. Well, no, to tell us a bit more about Canada. What's wrong with Mr. Harper?
Yes, well, Canada's Prime Minister is Stephen Harper, who has sort of taken over the Conservative Party and led it in a direction similar to that which the neocons took the United States in the US. I mean, obviously, one just has to look at Canada at the United Nations, where it's defending Israel constantly, apologizing for Israel's apartheid war crimes and its policy vis-a-vis Syria. You know, Canada is demonizing the Syrian government. A lot of Syrians in Canada are displeased with that. They feel that, you know, Canada should, you know, take a more balanced approach to Middle East affairs. And so I think it has a lot to do with Canada's resources. Obviously, Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world. And so, you know, some would say that Israel is trying to destabilize the Middle East currently. That was, you know, it kind of makes it inhospitable for oil companies. And some would say, you know, like in Iraq.
You're based in Canada. The Canadian population at large, I mean, I once lived in Canada, actually.
Oh, really?
And I remember the right-wing press of old, with the Vancouver Sun on the west side and on the east side of Canada. Canadians themselves must realize they are, at the very least, making themselves targets because of Canadian pro-Zionist policy.
Yes, well, I worked out the other day, because of course we have the first past the post system, and I worked out that of Canada's 34 million people, about 23 million didn't vote for Stephen Harper. You know, I did the math the other day on my calculator. So we have to remember, under the first past the post system, so you have in our society like half of people are apathetic and don't vote. And of those who did vote, more than half didn't vote for Stephen Harper.
Well, I know there have been elements of the Occupy movement and some great demonstrations, but, you know, it is to the right of the Obama administration. I don't think the Canadian government even wanted troop withdrawal from Iraq. Mr. Harper did, or troop withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Well, there is a strong Israel lobby in Canada, and I think what Zionists in Canada have done, because in the US, 1 in 3 Jews has been to Israel, so you could say 2/3 maybe aren't attached to Israel. And like Professor Norman Finkelstein has said that the Jewish youth aren't really, you know, looking to Israel as a country they care about. But in Canada, it's like 2 out of 3 Jews have been to Israel. And so we have a strong Israel lobby, and that has kind of like sold, I think, kind of sold Eurocentrism, or tried to make Stephen Harper and John Baird, the Foreign Affairs Minister, kind of view like imperialism.
It's a tiny population. You're saying, I mean, that's where it becomes very dangerous, of course. You're saying what they have a disproportionate control of resource elements and media within Canada.
Yes, an individual...
Zionists do.
Zionists do, yeah, not Jewish people, but Zionists. I mean, yeah, an individual named Israel Asper owns 60% of the Canadian media until recently, and so just that fact alone is pretty astounding. Professor James Petrus, when I was a sociology student, his books were required reading, and then I moved on to his works on Zionism, and he asserts that 30% of the Canadian economy is controlled by Zionists. And so, you know, if you're with the Conservative Party, the party of the rich, you're going to want to align yourself with those who control 30% of the Canadian stock exchange. You know, capitalism's hierarchical, and thus, it doesn't matter if you're a minority of the population. If you control a significant portion of the capital, then that's, you know, we live in a system where economic power buys political power, right? And so it doesn't really matter if you're a minority. So there is an Israel lobby in Canada.
How does this manifest itself in terms of attacks of minorities within Canada? Because to have a government that is obviously so polarizing in terms of these attitudes, how is that manifesting itself on the streets of Canada in the context of an economic crisis hitting Canada as well? You
mean like xenophobia? Yeah, well, obviously there's Aboriginal peoples in Canada, and like the tar sand oil development is attacking their lands, you know, like, and they feel quite disgruntled with the government for dispossessing them. You know, Canadian Constitution says on Section 35 that Aboriginal rights should be recognized and affirmed, and that the treaties should be respected. Like Canada had like a treaty system where they struck treaties with the Aboriginals, which was actually quite a better way of doing colonization, a bit more less murderous than what the US did.
We'll have Aborigines writing in about that.
But a lot of Aboriginals say, well, uphold these treaties. Like the Crown, Her Majesty gave us a pledge to, you know, ask our consent. But the local politicians in Alberta and in Ottawa, they don't respect the treaties, right? So you have the supreme law of Canada in the Constitution saying we recognize and affirm Aboriginal and treaty rights, but who enforces this affirmation of Aboriginal rights? It doesn't, you know, happen in practice. And so there's a big problem, right? You know, the supreme law says one one thing, but in practice, these oil companies go and, obviously control local politicians. And as I say, I think that really aligns with the Israeli policy for, like, disrupting the Middle East and allowing Israel to retain, like, hegemony in the Middle East. Because if they're dividing and ruling and fomenting sectarianism in the Middle East, like Suncor, a big Calgary-based oil company, just withdrew from Syria, right? So this policy, some would say what's going on in Syria is kind of a Zionist destabilization, initiative, right? Well, that's bad for oil interests, that they're withdrawing, and where are they going to go, right? Well, let's continue and expand our developments in Calgary. It's really devastating in Canada how, we have the third largest oil reserves, but no state-owned oil company. 1 million people in Canada now can't afford food and go to food banks just to eat. So
well, I think, you're painting quite a picture of the second largest country in the world. What a lovely place.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Joshua Blakely, for coming on the show.